Hey, so I've kind of given up on the whole trying to fix, my videos situation because like when I'm recording like this, it's normal. On my phone, it's normal. When I save to Google Photos, it's normal. It's just when I upload to YouTube that like it starts looking weird. So basically, I was like, you know what, I've tried everything, and then I'll probably figure something out later. But until then, I'm just going to stick to however this video comes out. Yeah, so first things first, my little machine that simulates tabs is working again. My dad fixed it for me, so shout out to my dad. And I'm really happy because this is an issue that I had kind of like seen before, but now we know kind of like what the issue is. So like if this happens later on, like I think I'll be able to fix it. Hopefully I won't need to do that, but if I do, I know what to do. So that's pretty good. But yeah, so today we're going to have a visit from like my aunts and my grandma. We're gonna have like food. We're gonna have like like a nice meal together and all that, but they decided like not to do it today, which is better because around like 5 p.m. today I'm going to have a little date with myself. I'm going to Outback Steakhouse, which it's one of my favorite places. I know it's kind of basic, but like they really make me happy. So yeah, they kind of like have some like some stuff that was kind of like discontinued, and they have it available now after a while. So I'm gonna get like this hamburger that is yeah, like that. I forgot exactly what they had in it, but it was it was no longer available, and now I'll be able to do that. Of the things I knew, there are these quesadillas which I kind of like want to try at some point. I'm gonna try just one thing like today, but yeah. So it's been like a while since I had a date with myself, so I'm excited about this. It's going to be nice to have some time for myself. I'm just going to go around and look at things, which I always love doing, and yeah, so it's going to be nice. And I don't know, like I've been trying, like I've been avoiding going out to do anything this past week, and the next week I'm also not going to be doing stuff, so I can save up the money for me to have like this dinner. Oh yeah, so I might try some drinks if they have anything new, because from Sunday to Friday they have this Billabong hour, so like basically drinks for half the price. So I'm looking forward to that. Like there are some that I saw online on the Outback Steakhouse website that they're not necessarily available when I look at the menu at the mall I'm going to, but I can ask if they're gonna make it. And it also reminded me of like a story from me that happened back in 2021 or 2022, where basically I had a couple of I went one time to Outback Steakhouse, and I asked for an Aperol Spritz, and they didn't know. Like the woman who asked you, like she looked at me as if I was crazy, and she was like, and then she asked the barman, and they also didn't know what to do. So they ended up giving me a rum and coke, which like it's not this is not what I wanted, but it was something. I tried something, like it was the first time I think I had a coke and run, so that was an experience. But yeah, but like right now there's also like a couple there's like some 3 or 4 drinks that I found on the website. So I might have one because I'm being cautious. I cannot drink too much, and I will not be drinking too much. I shouldn't drink ale actually, but just like every once in a while, like it's not that bad, particularly because I'm like pretty stable now, so I think I can afford to look at these things. So I am, as I said, looking forward to having a drink, and maybe next time I come up, because these like these products, they're back but for limited time, so like I have to kind of like, so I don't know, because also like when I'm gonna be there, my parents are going to be at church. They're gonna watch the service, because usually like they've been consuming it online, but every once in a while like they go there. So they're going because I'm going, so like maybe like next weekend or the weekend after that, like I can go again and try it, because as I said, 4 things. One is the s'mores, which is delicious, but I've already tried it, so I'm not really thinking about it. So there's like these 3 dishes I'm gonna like order. Let's let me see how like that works. But basically, but yeah, so changing topics, something that happened, which my dress is drying, but I decided to dye it, like one of my dresses, which is kind of like this beige nude color, which I think doesn't look as good on me, because it's almost like the same shade as my skin tone. So I've been thinking about like dyeing it, but I was going to dye it with like proper dye, but the place that I usually do this is at my aunt's place, and usually my grandma is doing something in like one of those like old school like log, it's not really it's not a stove, it's not, yeah, but like like you have actual logs there, and then it burns up. So because like usually it takes like half an hour of you mixing, and that is a lot if you're going to kind of like just do it on using gas, and like gets kind of expensive, so let's not do that. But yeah, but basically I've already decided. I think the color I want, I don't know if they're going to have that color. I think I might have to mix through them, but like that's not but so I decided yesterday, because I have I had three things with hair dye. One was like at the very end. Also, like I'm saying, hair dye was actually toner, because hair dye is very damaging. Toner is just like like there's like the pigments and like a cream, something that kind of like ends up helping your hair. So I had the one that is this color, and I bought back in August, because like it was about to expire. Like I think everything I have like years technically expire, but like it still works. Like it usually lists things like it's not when they expire, at least particularly toner. Like it's not like it is no. It's not like it's toxic. It just stops working as well. So there's that. But yeah, so I had one that is like that I have this much on, and there was one that I hadn't even started. And basically, I had this idea like I'm gonna use it. I'm gonna dye it. And yeah, it didn't turn out so well, because well basically I like it didn't get I didn't have enough to dye the whole dress, so it's only like on the front. And also the color that it turned out, like I didn't really like it, which is kind of crazy because usually I really like colors. So like it's very rare for me to find something that I don't like how it turned out, particularly when I'm like dyeing or painting or anything like that. But yeah, so I had basically just I've left it like soaking for a while. I just like left it with some soap. So, and like the water is still blue when I wash it, so there's still like something, but I kind of like I did as much as I could, and then I just leave it in drying. So at some point I'm gonna show you the dress, but like it didn't turn out as great, but it is toner, so like it is going to fade, but I don't know if it's going to fade completely. So I think that there's always going to be this chance of like the dress being mismatched. But yeah, I'm waiting for it to dry to see kind of like how like how it goes, because I am basically yeah, but like it was an attempt, it didn't work out, but I am glad that I tried. I don't regret it, because I only would know if it worked out by trying. So there's that. But yeah, so that is kind of like where I am at. And now talking about my head, I have not had like that thoughts yet, and I'm not saying yet as in like I don't want to have those thoughts, but like there is a history here, and I don't think I'm getting closer to having those thoughts, but I definitely found myself to be a little bit more despondent. I'd say more, because I wouldn't call myself to say that I'm despondent, period. It's just that I don't know, like some things, they're just like passing through me, and they're making me kind of like feeling kind of meh about things. And I mean, I'm still excited about different things. I'm excited about like this new major I'm studying. I'm excited about like my writing, but I'm struggling to write. That is one thing I'm struggling. And we're gonna leave like in around like 2 hours, so I will try to work on my my writing, because even if I don't get a lot done, I think I have to kind of like make an effort and make some progress. Like I start with a little progress, and then it grows increasingly more significant my progress. But basically what I'm trying to say is that I am not feeling despondent and more than I was before. It's just that things are kind of like, as I said, they're passing me by, and I'm kind of like and also some things that were not really affecting me, they're kind of affecting me now. So I'm thinking, for example, politics, like that is something, politics and religion, there's things that I'm basically like they're affecting me a little bit more than they were. And it's always worrisome, because like those are the things that have historically made me feel very uncomfortable and triggered and all that. So I kind of like need to kind of like handle this, not necessarily better, but like I need to process my feelings, like I need to process them better. I have to like I'm not trying to create expectations that like they're realistic about what I can or cannot do. I don't hope that tomorrow I will stop caring, but there's definitely something that I can do about this. And I think it goes back to what I said in like the previous video, where I was talking about safety and security, and how a lot of things happen, they make me feel unsafe. and because of that, like I had these negative responses, and like it's kind of like one thing pulls another and another and another, and before I realized, like I'm completely affected. It's no longer just the hint of something; it is the full picture. But I will say that like some of the things that have been kind of like leaving me feeling very tense, like they are not. I'm not feeling any more tense than I was, because sometimes like this is what happens. Like something affects you at this point in time, and then it just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows. And I don't think that's happening. So I think that I've stabilized the level in which things are kind of like affecting me, which is I mean, it is kind of like all that you can do sometimes. And I think it's important for you to be, if you be realistic about, what you can, like what progress is like, because, kind of like you might be at zero and want to get to 100 right away, but like, no, you just have to focus at like 10. And once you get there, 20, go one step at a time. And that is, not only better for your mental health, but it's also much more doable. Like you can actually, things become more manageable and less insurmountable. So I'm very, so that's kind of like what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about doing. But that being said, I have been having some introspective moments, like in some TMI areas of my life. I've been kind of like seeing myself being increasingly freer, just like I think I'm judging myself less, because there's this vision that I have of what I should be. I kind of want to be a strong person, and we kind of like have all these biases and that kind of like define how we define strength. And there are some things, as I said, from like some TMI areas of my life that I realized that I kind of like I had this idea that I had to be like this, and that if I was anything other than this, I was being weak, or I wasn't being kind of like was proactive or assertive. And I think that ultimately like the best thing you can have is feeling confident in yourself and what you want, and advocating for that. So finding a certain context which is hopefully is healthy, where you can kind of like play yourself, kind of like play yourself in a certain way, because that's ultimately what you're doing. Like you're playing a part until you figure out like who you are. So you're trying out. So as I said, in a way you're kind of like playing a role. The role you're playing is yourself, but sometimes you have to try things so you can kind of like come to a conclusion about how that fits into your narrative, like the person who you are, the person you want to be. And in today's in the evening, I'm going to have, it's already been like a year since I was feeling very like I had a certain fantasy. And it's interesting because it's just really flew by. If you ask me, I probably say it was like 6 months ago. And it's going to be an exercise for me to kind of like see if like those fantasies they come back, or how like they manifest, because that is I don't know, I've been seeing hints of like me kind of like going back to those fantasies, and I don't want that, because it's not something that is good for me. It's not really helpful either. Like I want to have more realistic expectations and dreams, stuff that I can actually do, not this crazy megalomaniac bullshit. So it's interesting because, as I said, like depending on like the outcome, I will have some of like the thoughts come back, and I don't really want that. But also like I don't really know what I want. I think I know what I don't want, and that's a good starting point. Because it is hard to kind of like figure out what you want when it comes to something you have no experience with. Something that is just hypothetical, because you can create all these different scenarios in your head, and they can all make sense. They can all seem to be kind of like this. They can all seem to work out, but it isn't until you kind of like have a little taste of that you really know if something is worth it or not. And I'm trying to figure out like what is worth it, like what is worth my time. Like I want to keep my peace of mind, so like I have to kind of like handle things in a way where I'm not really that affected about certain things. Naturally, you just want yourself not to be affected. That's nothing. Like you have to deconstruct what is affecting you, and break down smaller parts and like tackle them like individually, instead of like tackling everything, because as I said, it can be very undoable, because it can be something that is just too big and too overwhelming, and that you can't really I don't know, it can really favor. So basically, I've been thinking a lot about what I want from life and who I want to be. It's interesting because like I think I mentioned it before. I know for a fact I mentioned before that I want to define myself outside of the confines of like my professional and academic life. Although I will say that like this new major that I'm studying, like it is really helping with that, because now I have like a direction, work wise, that's to do with my academic life. So like I have a direction. Because it's interesting also how like you have different stages in your life, because I think that when I first started, my first major, the first thing I tried, college wise, like I didn't really have, a lot of like perspective, not that, the area didn't offer perspective, because, it was in tech. So like there's always, stuff to do. But, I was kind of like more focused on, like I'm going to try this thing and then try that other thing and figure it out. And like right now I'm more focused on, like not more focused, but like there is a higher focus, in my head as to kind of like what I can do work wise, with like this new major I'm trying. And that is, something that I think is going to be really good for kind of like reintegrating into society, because in some ways I'm kind of like secluded, I've talked about it before, kind of like I have historically isolated myself. So this is, an interesting development, an interesting, thing to kind of like have to keep in mind, that I kind of like want, as I said, to join society. It's not like I was, in prison or anything, but yeah, I am being more active, socially speaking. And not only am I being more active, I think I'm starting to value my social life, like giving it its due importance, because historically I have just really rejected that. And right now I'm like, no, I want to, like I started this new major, so I have classmates. They're going to have, things that we have to do in group, and I am not going to isolate myself, because there are some things that, some teachers, they're like, some professors, they're like, like you can do it alone or in a group. And basically I kind of like, what, I'm gonna try to do this in a group. I'm going to try and like interact with people, and not only at a superficial level. I mean, sometimes like particularly work and school, like a lot of interactions you have, like they're very dependent, most if not all interactions you have, they're dependent on like the fact that you are kind of like like in the same physical environment. So that is something to keep in mind. And I mean, I'm not really creating expectations that I'm going to find like my people or anything like that, but I kind of like, I wanna try and not really isolate myself, because I think like we're all just islands, we're all isolated to some degree. Yeah, and that's kind of like always been the case. That's always going to be the case. That's kind of like the nature of socializing. But I don't want to kind of like do more in terms of like making myself isolated more than I know I have to be. It's important for you to have your moments with yourself, moments of introspection. For example, I'm going to go out on a date with myself. So like I do enjoy these moments, but I think that a part of me has been learning that I can kind of like deal with some of my aspirations, some of my, not aspirations, but like my fantasies and my dreams. I can do that by adding elements to my life, things that are doable. So like having more friends, like interacting more, like those are things that can ground you, they can be your anchors. And I'm very like interested, and hopefully, I don't know, I'm interested in making things work out that way. As I said, like I want to want to be present, in certain circles that historically I have not really been in. And I think that, my willingness is a good step, it's a good beginning, but, I think I need to have more action, I have to be more active in that regard, because I think historically I've been very, like, passive in the sense of, like, I'm open to, things happening, in terms of, like, my social life. And, like, right now I'm like, no, I have to make this happen, I have to reach out. And I did mention, like, last week, like, this girl that I thought we could be friends, and I mean, we're friendly, that didn't really go anywhere, but I didn't really make an effort to kind of, like, send things out, so, I can complain. But, it is something that I'm, that kind of, like, that I think of for a while, because I could make kind of like an effort, as I said, to kind of like reach out to her, but I'm probably not gonna do it, because there's still a lot of like, I know, it's like there's this block, like in my mind that prevents me from kind of like getting things done, not things, but like specifically for me socializing. And I'm kind of done with that, like I'm done living my fantasies. And as I said, like this can be like a solution, an outcome. So I'm really glad that like we are, I say we, but like that I am because it's basically like every day I end up convincing myself more that I have to be more active socially. And I still I'm doing better than I used to, but I'm still nowhere near, I guess, like, because it's not that I necessarily dread being outgoing. It's just that, I mean, particularly like my parents are going to give you many examples, would give you many examples of, like me being very outgoing when I was a kid. So I'm trying to get back to that a little bit more. But it's interesting because like something that I think like I have recently, by recently I mean like probably like the last couple of years, that something that has been kind of like, come to mind, for me, is the fact that I'm, that sometimes I'm shy, like I historically always been very, adamant that I was not shy, I was just not interested, which was true. I wasn't interested, when there was trauma there, so it was harder for me to get interested, when I have all these other things to overcome. But basically, it got to a point that I was like, what, like I am a little shy. I'm kind of like, have a little social anxiety, and right now, like I care way less, and I think that it was easy for me to fool myself because there were certain things that people kind of like dreaded being considered that I didn't really care about them, but there were so many things that I did care, and I did, like they made a difference. They prevented me from like, I guess, being like as out there as I could have been. But basically, as I said, like I have acknowledged that sometimes I can be a little shy, and I think that I've been making a lot of progress regarding like that. I'm no longer as shy, but I'm still like, like I'm still kind of shy. Maybe it's not shy. There's like a bad bit, but I think that like, why am I not, like making more of an effort in certain areas, right? And I think that it has to do with shyness. Like I don't want to interact, I don't want to put myself out there because there's this fear of rejection and of embarrassment. And I am at a point where I can finally acknowledge that, because for so long I was very, like set on the fact that I don't care. I did not care. I'm not doing this because I don't want to. And yes, there was some truth to that. Like I kind of like, but the thing is that like a lot of this led to me being kind of like almost held hostage by some of my ambitions and aspirations and my fantasies. So like I kind of like am at the point right now where I don't want to be, like I don't want my fantasies to kind of like have such a hold on me, and that means kind of like taking some risks. And like and this goes for like any area of your life, but I'm specifically thinking about my social life. Like there's more that you can do. There's always more that you can do. I mean, sometimes like you don't ever think that you can, so like, I mean, giving up is something that you do, so there's that. But yeah, I've been kind of like, like trying to define myself, as I said, and I feel like I'm at a point where like work, school, like they can, be part of this definition, but they can't be the only thing, but what I was saying before, I think I'm not satisfied with how I said it, how I phrased it. But basically, I'm trying to say that, like me isolating myself, the more distance I put between myself and everybody else, the more, like the more I kind of like live in my own fantasies. So for me to stop living these fantasies, I had to, exist in real life, and based on, like kind of like create connections, and I mean, connections, we think of people, so that is also part of it. But it can be connections, it can be kind of like a new hobby, like that can be a connection that you're kind of like developing. So like there are many things, and as I said, like each new thing that I add, it kind of like improves my quality of my well-being and my quality of life, because I'm no longer living as much in my head. I can live, like rent, like there's not as many things living rent-free in my head. So that is kind of like something that I find to be very important, to me, which is just, like not living my fantasies, because I have a history of like that being the case, and I am tired. I am sick and tired of like that being the case. I'm sick and tired of, like my real life not being enough for me, not being, like it doesn't really, I'm tired of not sufficing, because that is, I mean, you're never going to have everything you want. There's always going to be something, that you can have. Even like people at the very top, like probably they will want that, there are things they want that they can get. Because it can also be like physical things, like materialistic things, can also be like things having to do with your head, having to do with the world. And I think that I have to start dealing better with dealing better with, my frustration in terms of like how the world is, like that people think a certain way or that they don't think a certain way, that like they're guided by some things or they're not guided by some other things. And I think that because you can't control other people, you can only control how you respond, right? And I really want to get to a point where like I can be okay with the world being what it is, because I think sometimes like you hold on to the hope that like things are going to get better, and that can kind of like get in the way, because what if things don't get better, what if things get worse, and then suddenly you don't want to exist in your own life. So what I want for myself is, like for me to learn how to properly to keep myself stable, when things are not stable around me, when things are going from bad to worse and worse to worst. And I mean, easier said than done. It always is easier said than done. It's always like the theory, I mean, sometimes like the practice is easier than the theory. Like you change something, you do something, and then you can properly explain like why that worked out the way that it did and why it affected you the way that it did, but like it still had an effect. But usually, when, because I tend to have like lots of moments of introspection, and I've been struggling to write my novel, so that is kind of like comes to play, because I am more, I'm increasingly, more invested in my own head. And sometimes like that means fantasies, but I try my best to kind of like just push that away. Right now I have one consistent, one constant fantasy that I have, and shockingly enough, it has to do with interacting, socializing with people. It's one particular type of interaction, but it's kind of like also the things that lead up to that and things that happen after that. And sometimes like it ends up connecting with other, things in my life. For example, my writing, like it's certainly like that has, kind of like a future that it doesn't have right now. Like things can always change. And you could argue that some things never do, but they never change. And I mean, certain, there's no way, like, yes, for example, like, the fantasies have changed in my life, but like, there's always a fantasy there. There's always something. So that's like something that I have to kind of like keep in mind. I have to remind myself of that. Like change, it is a process. So maybe actually like I kind of like come to, I'm resigned to the fact that like I'll never not fantasize about things, because that's just human nature. Everybody fantasizes about something, like positive or negative. There's always that. And basically I'm very so yeah, I think that trying to suppress those fantasies is not the best way for me to do things. I think that if I can kind of like direct what I am, direct fantasies, for example, like instead of like focusing on fantasizing about myself and my life, I fantasize about my, like my writing, like I'm just having these developments and things happening in the things I'm writing. Like that is, for me, the ideal scenario, because sometimes like it feels like you're lacking ideas, you're lacking imagination. Because for example, like what I mean that, right now I'm struggling to write as opposed to when I was just writing right away, is that when I sit down and I start reading it, like before I was like ideas were coming, like I kept writing, like stuff kept like being pretend, I kept connecting different things. And like right now I sit and I sit down and I look at it and like no ideas come, and that is a problem for me, because I mean, of course, as I said, like I can kind of like make more of an effort, and I kind of like develop some strategies. One that I don't know how good this is, but I have this random word generator. So sometimes like I'm struggling, I just generate a word, and you could maybe try to make it work with that word, but like if I feel that there's nothing there, I go to the next one. And sometimes like all it needs is like a word to spark something. So yeah, that is something that I started doing. I haven't done it consistently. I probably should. Like I said, I'm gonna have a couple hours after none of this video, probably like less than a couple hours, probably like an hour and a half, but that is going to be an hour and a half that I'll be writing. I will say I'll be trying, and if I can make any progress, like that is already a win in my book. And I think that's also something to keep in mind. Like sometimes you have to learn to take a win, because there's this whole thing of like yes and, right? So like I don't think I'm using it in the right way, but if something good happens, but like sometimes it's not going to be the full picture. It's going to be just a part of it. So like you look at that and like, this is good, what about this? Like no, this happened, celebrate this, enjoy this, and then you move on to the next thing. So yeah, because also like I think this goes together with the whole gratitude thing that I said. I'm trying to be more not to be more grateful, but to voice more my gratefulness more. Like I want to say them aloud. It doesn't have to be aloud, but like it can be aloud. It can be just in your head. But I think that is a good way for you to add some perspective into life, because sometimes like you can only be bothered with negative things. They are the ones that stand out. So like when you have a moment where you're just like, okay, it's a bad thing happened, look at all these great things that have occurred. Like this is worth noting. It's with yeah, like it's worth considering this, because so it changes your perspective, your outlook, because like you go from being unhappy that things are not really happening for you the way you want them to, or sometimes things aren't happening at all, and you go from from that point to like being kind of like, what, like everything has its time. I don't generally believe that there's a point to everything, that there's a reason why things happen, but I do understand why people really feel attached to that idea, and I think that it is important for you to, and I think that it's helpful, and it can so yeah, so like as I said, like I don't think there's any higher power, any higher force or whatever that is making everything fall into place. But looking at life that way, like it has some benefits. I think when you look at life and you are and you kind of like and you're just saying like, okay, this happened, so this could happen, or this thing happened and it's happening simultaneously. So for example, I have like there's this sort of like serendipity, like things happening, and I don't know, I think I mentioned this in the last video, not the one before where I was like tasting this no Monster energy drink, but the one before that, where I was basically I think I don't remember this exact example, but I did say how like things fell into place, like this happened, and this happened because like this happened, like this gave an opening to this to occur. And as I said, like I don't really believe in a higher power, so I don't really think there's anything behind the curtains, anyone behind the curtains controlling things. But it is an interesting way of like looking at things. And as I said, like I think that it helps you process things, it helps you do things better, because if you think that there is a point of something bad that happened, that there's something good is going to come from that, or despite that, or whatever, like I think that you can be more at peace with yourself, which is something that like I've been invested involved in some religious situations, even though I'm an atheist, and I'm there for community, interacting with people, like and I mean, like I grew up Christian, so all the stories you're telling I already know, but it is interesting because sometimes like you can look, somebody saying something, like you're looking at the same something they already know from a different perspective, and that can, it kind of like you can make connections with that, and that's really good. But something that's been happening, I'm getting kind of like, I'm not even getting any more Christian, I'm getting kind of like the opposite in a certain way, because I'm kind of like looking at a lot of like the religious things that are being said, and I'm looking from like a psychological standpoint, like I'm looking at that them and being like, okay, so like when you do this, is this good for your psyche, like this can lead to relaxation and to having peace of mind. And ultimately, like that is pretty much what any idea, any belief, any ideology, like what you're going for, like it's giving you peace, giving you making you happier, making you more peaceful, and helping you handle things. So I can appreciate like religion and other like other belief systems, and how like they impact people. And also like I can kind of like find like some ways in which like I could kind of as I said, like I can kind of deal better with like what's happening. So as I said, I don't really believe there's anything in control, but if I kind of like I remove my, for example, I remove the weight of my life, of my living, the things that are happening off my shoulders, and what people do is that they place it on on top of God. And I think that is even if I don't believe in that, like that there is something to be said about the idea of like removing something for yourself, and like removing it from your psyche, from like your like your mindsets, and from what is happening. So yeah, so that is I think that basically what I'm trying to say is that you can find the knowledge and wisdom anywhere and everywhere, and also like particularly when it comes to like religion, like it has a lot of these religions, they have existed for thousands of years, so this systems, these belief systems, like they are it's not that they are like it's not that they are kind of like perfect or anything, but you can kind of like tell that there is, like there's something there that people are seeing for it to kind of like keep existing, keep on living. So I think that that's important to keep in mind. Being less arrogant, I guess. I wouldn't say that I am like an arrogant person, not these days. It used to be something that was an issue for me. I even have like a tattoo right here. It's Erebus from the Chronicles of Narnia, the horse and his boy, and she has this journey of like dealing with her arrogance and her pride. And I would used to read, this chronicle at least like once a year, not so much anymore. But it was interesting because it was kind of like a journey that I went through every time of like me becoming humbler, like less, more modest, if you will. And I think that is something I have to constantly get back to, because I am a really proud person. So sometimes I'm not necessarily arrogant, but like I'm really set in my ways. I'm stubborn too. And that is like this is something that, as I said, I have come to accept about myself. And it's good when you accept something, particularly something that is so pivotal. I'm talking about, right? Because on my back I have this tattoo, that is just like with seven elements, and like each of them represents like a sin, one of the deadly sins, or vices. For me, I refer to them as vices. Just for clarity, because people, because whenever there's something religious that I'm associated with, and because I'm an atheist and like people know that about me, they always like, is that what's happening? And as I said, like there is something nostalgic about Christianity because I grew up there. So for example, like I was taught those stories when I was a kid, and they really impacted me. Like they really molded my taste in stories. So like I think that when you see what I write, you can definitely find connections like that, and I really enjoy it. So reading like some Bible stories, particularly the ones like in the Old Testament, like this First Samuel, Second Samuel, Judges. Yeah, Judges come first. But like you have like the story of like the people of Israel, and it's still very interesting, and I really enjoy them. I found them to be inspiring. Not inspiring as in like I feel inspired by this, to become a better person. More like they give me ideas. Maybe that's what I should be doing. I should be, reading more. I have a Bible right there, and I got it because I was reading from Songs of Solomon, and it has some beautiful imagery there, and I ended up using one of the quotes, in my novel. So reading that. The other day we went, to visit, the pregnant women's prison. We really, I ended up like at a moment when they were praying, I was like going through the Bible and I was reading some stuff, particularly from King David. Like it's kind of crazy because I don't know. I've always liked, like that story, those stories, because it is a whole saga, and I think that is really. I'm grateful that I have like that. That is something that I have that I can read and I can reflect on, because he's a very imperfect man, and that's also like he has depression, so that is also relatable for me. Because sometimes like there's these stories of infallible people, and I don't always. I like them when there's a subversion. Like somebody is perceived as being perfect, but like they're not, like at least by current standards. Like it's when you look at like stories of like myths and whatever, and then you have like some deities, and is it deity or deity? I don't and they rape somebody, or something along those lines. Like those people were considered to be kind of like untouchable in a certain way. They were not perfect by any means, but like they had power, and like they could do stuff with the power. And like basically the stories, you could call them like these cautionary tales. And so there was something there. Also, there is this saying that I really like in Latin, that is, it translates to what is allowed, for Jovi, from Jupiter, isn't allowed to, Bobby and Jovi. Yeah, like what's allowed to Jovi isn't allowed to the pool, which is basically, it's like, like you as a person, a human, like you can like do or behave the way that the gods do. And like I think that is interesting. I might get tattoo about someday, but like I don't think I would get like the sentence, but something that is reminiscent of that. I butchered this, the quote, the quotation, but it is what it is. But yeah, so I was talking about how sometimes like it is really important for you to accept yourself, your shortcomings and all, because that's the only way that you can kind of like try to counteract, those tendencies and those behaviors that you have, and because sometimes just knowing the past doesn't really fix anything. I can look back and be like, I was very arrogant here, I was very proud here, and like that was something that got in the way. But like just knowing that is important. Like knowing is half the battle, right? So it is important for you to know, but like you need a strategy. You need to kind of like go deeper and just, so for example, like why is that I am prideful? Why is that I am arrogant? Like where is this rooted at? And like when you get deep down, of course, like these things are usually there's like multiple answers to them. So like you might get deep down into like one reason, and then you do with that reason, but like the behavior is going to continue because there's other reasons why like that has that behavior is there. And naturally, just with like anything else in my life, like trauma really does kind of like play a large role on like me being kind of like proud slash arrogant, because basically, honestly, like I think that I wanted to be a version of myself that was more confident in a way, because I feel like in that particular trauma that I had, also like there are multiple traumas that I can be talking about, but the big one, like the one that just really ruined my life for a little while, for like a decade or so. I think that I felt very meek, like the way that I interacted, the way I behaved. I did try, I did make an effort to escape, but like that was not, that didn't really lead anywhere, and I only got hurt in the process. But like, so I feel like, but I still feel like I felt meek. So I wanted the opposite of that. I think that I went to confidence. I want to be assertive, as I said, and I think that sometimes in my attempt to be assertive, I end up being just conceited, and that is something that is kind of like hard for me to unpack, honestly, because that is still something I'm struggling with. Like if I don't pay attention, I do resort to being kind of like proud and arrogant a lot of the time. So there's that. But like enough. Also, so like that trauma, like I can kind of like feel that, like I felt very weak, and as a consequence I ended up, as I said, like trying to be the opposite of that. So sometimes I was even like going to like another extreme. So I was like very abrasive and aggressive, because like ideally you want to be sort of, but like sometimes this is easier to do, being abrasive and aggressive. So that is pretty much the connection between myself here and myself here. And my other traumas, for example, my religious trauma, it comes to play a very large role, because I grew up in an environment where technically you could ask questions and have issues, but it was kind of discouraged, like indirectly. So whenever I had something, like for example, I had a question or something, like I didn't agree with, and what was being preached, I had to come up with like a very inhuman level of confidence, that was the case, because if my reasoning, my whatever I said, like it left any room for anything, like that would be the thing that would be focused on, like, and not what I was saying. So here's an example. When I was younger, I really struggled to get to a point where I could freely say like, oh, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in these things, because the way that I was raised is pretty much a counter question. So they're basically saying like, if you're questioning the existence of God, or something along those lines, it is because like the devil, is kind of like tempting you, like the world is influencing how you're thinking, and I didn't want to be a person who was influenced. I wanted to be influential. I didn't want to be like influenced. So that was something that really hurt me, because for so long I didn't really allow myself to voice my issues fully, because there's always like that, like the thing of like, okay, you're not being like you're being swayed by the world or something. So it took me a while for me to be able to properly deprogram that in my head, so much so that I think I started like probably I officially left the church in 2019, and like that was a year where I finally was able to kind of like break down the things I believed in, the things that I didn't believe in. But before that, I felt very this way of what people said as I spoke, but also what had been really hammered in my head when I was a kid. That if you're questioning, like you're being influenced. And because of my trauma, the other one, like I didn't want to be influenced by anybody. Like I wanted to be I wanted to control, not to be controlled. So that was kind of like a whole thing for me. And so yeah, so I think that's another reason why I really felt like I felt like I needed, to impose myself, and for that to kind of like be the case. As I said, like sometimes you can be assertive, you can be confident, so you become abrasive and aggressive. So that was, another element that, kind of like came here. And also, like, I have historically really feared, kind of, um, I really feared like being influenced, as I said. Like, I didn't want to be manipulated. So basically, anything that was trying to kind of like or anything, or do anything in my head, I was like, no, I'm gonna reject all of this. And that didn't help, because sometimes, like, like those things you're questioning, like, it's good that you're questioning those things, because like, you're kind of like getting, like getting yourself on the same page, every area of your life, figuring out who you are, what you stand for, what you don't stand for, and all of that. And basically, as I said, I don't know, like, I was very skittish, about the prospect of being kind of like manipulated, or influenced in any way. So yeah, so today I can say that, certain things influence me. They have influenced me, and they will continue. There will be more things in the future that will influence me. But even that was kind of like a bad word, for me, because I feel like any variation of that, it was kind of like something that my brain processed as being kind of like manipulation. So like, oh, people are trying to manipulate me. They're trying to, trick me or something. And that was, like, that was just my reality for for many years. So, these days I can, I'm fully, I think writing really helped with that, because I started to kind of like admit, like, not admit, but like acknowledge that, like, my literary influences, the stuff that really impacted me, that really had, that made a difference in my life, in the way that I wrote, but also in the way that I was. Paradise Lost is a good example. I don't know if I have a favorite book, but if there is like a top 10, top 5 list, is definitely there. And because it was a reading that really was very transformative, for me, but also like it totally influenced like me as a person, but also what I wanted to write. So I think that it started like just having small concessions, of like, okay, this thing influenced me, this impacted me. It kind of like allowed me to slowly kind of like build up and get to a point where I'm saying like, okay, this thing that this person said, it influenced how I see the world, how I think, and that is totally fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, no issue. It's just like my head that is just like really pushing this idea that there is an issue, and that there is something that I should be doing, or that I shouldn't be doing. And ultimately, like, it's an internal battle, like, as I said, like, it's okay for me to struggle and with myself, and figuring out like what I think, but it's not okay, it's fantasizing. Like, I'm okay with having introspective moments. I think that they're really good, like, they're really helpful, because they end up leading to me having a better quality of life, to like, to improve my well-being, because then I can intervene on the things that have to be intervened, and I can kind of, yeah, pretty much that. I don't have to explain this. But yeah, but back to the thing that I said, that I have a tendency of being proud and arrogant. As I said, like, I think the arrogant part I've been able to kind of like counteract a lot, because I think I got to a point where like I don't, because I felt that before I had this kind of like duty of being, because I was perceived as being smart growing up as a kid, as a teenager, so like that was part of my identity, and I think that I had to really behave in a way that I couldn't betray that. So I couldn't do anything dumb, I couldn't do anything stupid, because that was kind of going against my nature, the nature that I wanted to have. So I think that led to like me being very arrogant about the way I came about things, because basically if I thought that like I had to, and I think the way that I would interact with people, it'd be very derisive, like I'll be kind of bothered, sometimes even mean, like I will be insulting somebody's intellect for like no reason. And it is kind of like something that it took a little while for me to get over that, because I had to first like admit that like, okay, I really care about being perceived as smart. So like this is something that is is a sore spot for me. Like whenever I say or do something like that, like makes me like, okay, I said and I did that, and it was kind of like just haunt me, for the rest of my days. Same thing, for example, with being considered cringe. I guess I don't care so much about that anymore. I think this is something that like teenagers feel that's right present, but like as an adult, like you shouldn't really care about being cringe. There's just so many things you have to do. You have to live a whole ass life, as an adult, like just allow yourself, you know, give yourself some grace, you know, like allow yourself to like things and be passionate about things, you know. And because I felt like for so long I was also very much stuck in this thing of like being kind of like very indifferent and not really allowing. So for example, like there's so many things that I've liked throughout the years, but I never really allow myself to be part of the fandoms, you know, behind these things, which, you know, it sounds crazy because I think there was issues with commitment that I had, but I think that more than that, it was just like the fear, because, you know, like if you're part of fandom, then you're kind of like officializing that, you're just making it official that you're into that. And as I said, like back to the whole thing of like me being smart, there are some things that they were always, you know, hammered in my head, like this is not what smart girls do. You know, a good example, Twilight, that was, you know, something that there was a lot of like that, you know, basically because adults, you know, teenagers pretty much saying that like, oh, you can, you like that, you know, like that is, you know, you're so smart and whatever. And then I got to a point, like that's a very problematic series, I don't deny that, but you know, today I can be like, yeah, like that influenced me, like that was something I was into, and that is something that no one was like into, like that influenced my writing, you know, like the whole vampire thing, you really, you know, got me going. So I created worlds in which like that was happening, basically fan fictions without the fan part, because, you know, I was creating my own characters. But you know, like, so that, but just kind of like a good example, like, so I never really said out that I was into that fandom. That was something that I kept, you know, behind closed doors, and that's so silly. Like, why can't I just you know, like enjoy things? And I know there's a whole thing with like teenage girls enjoying things and like how it's the whole thing, but basically what I'm trying to get here is that I was too scared of like appearing like not to be intellectual, and I let that kind of like dictate what I consumed in a lot of like different contexts. You know, for example, the books I consumed, I ended up, you know, reading a lot of classics because that's pretty much like not what I'm supposed to do, but that is, you know, like the type of literature that, like, you know, match my intellect. I will be perceived that way. I will be that way. And you know, stuff that I watched too. Like there is a TV show that I'm not gonna say because I'm still a little embarrassed that I like it, but you know, like that's a whole thing that was like I really enjoy it. Like that really impacted my life positively, but I can't really, you know, fully say that I liked it. I think right now I'm like going through like some changes where I'll be able to get to a point where I'm like, I like the show, even if it's not, even if it's flawed, even if it has, you know, it's awkward and cringy at times, like I still appreciate it. And there's like a lot of other things like that as well. I remember that, you know, First Kill, which was a TV show that only lasted one season, and it was like cheesy and cringy and all that, but I enjoyed it. Like that's like my trash, you know. And that, you know, something that like today I can say it, but at the time, you know, I felt like, oh, can I say, I don't want to, you know, say that because I don't want to be judged. So it also goes back a lot to you feeling you not wanting to be judged, because like if you're enjoying something in the privacy of your own home, like, you know, just enjoy it. Basically, I don't, once again, easier said than done, but also I do think that there are two layers to this. Like one of them is that the layer of like external, you know, validation and whatever, but also internal, because for example, like this, some of like this, you know, things that I look at right now that get me, you know, that I'm like, okay, that's kind of, a part of me didn't want to acknowledge that I liked it, you know, because it was not what I was supposed to like. So sometimes, you know, to kind of like maintain this idea that I didn't like that, I would outwardly say that I didn't like that, not because, you know, when I did like, because, you know, I could at least maintain the notion, because there's been a lot of times in my life where it's something that happens to this day that like I want to be something, but you know, I am not there yet, or like everything about me does not indicate that I'm that thing. So, you know, like I present myself in a way to the world that validates me that way, because like I'm going to be perceived as being that thing, you know, and like this is going to, you know, impact how I am. So like if I'm perceived as that thing, like it's the next best thing, you know, I can be that, because also sometimes like, you know, like there are some things that like internal validation is like the best validation, but there's some stuff, particularly when you're insecure about something, the external validation, like it works better, because, you know, with usually, I mean, there are more voices, like there are many voices in our heads, but like they're all, you know, versions of ourselves. So, you know, like when you add something external, like you have all the different voices, you know, but like none of them are you know, like because it's also like this whole thing of like you trusting your own judgment, because I think that I have gaslighted myself so much in some areas that it got to a point that like even if I'm doing something that like pretty much proves that I am this, I am that, I don't believe myself. It's like there's this questioning, like there's this I'm doubting that is true, and it doesn't help because I have lied to myself a lot of times. I have made myself believe things that were not true, for a variety of different reasons. So it's kind of like I understand why my head sometimes is not really satisfied with just me saying, like this is it, this is me, because historically I've also said that like that about many things that were not true, so there's that. For example, I think a good example that just came to mind is the thing about being cool. I am not a cool person. I have never been a cool person, and at this point, I'm like, yeah, I'm never going to be one of the cool kids, and that's okay. Like, I'm fine. But it was something that, as I said, when I was a teenager, I really wanted. So I kind of like created things in my head that made me believe that that was the case, and so like I basically gaslighted myself that way. So if I do something today that is kind of cool or whatever, like in my head, like I can't really, I doubt that. I'm like, yeah, are you sure that is, that you're being cool here? Because that is not, historically, that hasn't really been the case. So yeah, so basically that's the lesson is like, if you gaslight yourself long enough, you're just going to question everything that happens in your head, so like every time I feel like I've grown or that I've had some type of development, I will look back and I'll be like, have I though? Like, am I just looking and finding things? Because for example, when it comes to improvement, self-improvement, I remember myself like back in like when I have a vision, an image of like when I was living in Portugal, where I was looking out the window, and I think I had this thought because I associate this with like this memory, where I'm like, am I really making progress, or am I just fooling myself into believing that I am? Because at the time, like I think 2016, 17, and 18, particularly 17, okay, 18, 7, at the end of 17, I had like a moment where I was able to be honest about myself, about my identity. I shared with my parents, like that was the whole thing, and that started to kind of like something started to crumble down, after that, because a lot of like the barriers I was putting up, like they were kind of like coming undone because I was finally being honest with myself, about who I was and about what I wanted, what I liked, and all of that. But so 2018 was like a year where I was questioning a lot of things, but I wasn't making a whole lot of progress, and not as much progress as I thought I would have, because I was like, okay, I just did this big thing, I just came out here, and like I thought that this was the thing that was hindering me, and it was hindering me, but it's still like it didn't. So I evolved, I grew, but like I didn't get not perfect. I mean, I wanted perfection back then. Right now I'll settle for stable, but consistently stable, like that's important. But like back then I would look at myself and I'm like, okay, I'm still being strung along by this fantasies, for example. So I had this fantasy, I think I mentioned this before, from like age 11 to 21. Like I had one fantasy, and it was so overwhelming that everything in my life existed surrounding that. Everything was about that, and it didn't really happen, and it didn't even get close to happening. But at the same time, like right now, I'm like, I don't need that to happen, like I have the tools to deal with like my feelings and my insecurities. I don't need to kind of like get like on top of the world, to kind of like find myself like being okay. But yeah, but I do remember this moment where I was like, because I feel like there's so many different situations in my life where I was like, okay, now we broke through, so like now things are going to happen, now the future is happening, now that's kind of like how my head goes. But most of these things, I feel like fantasy is ultimately the thing that I'm kind of like attached to, because I just hope, even though I know it's not doable, that one day I'm going to look at myself and I'll no longer be fantasizing about things. Because I think whenever I get lost in these fantasies, I always have the same feeling of like, again, this again. I'm so done. I want to break free, basically, but I'm stuck there. And as I said, like what I can do is redirect the fantasies. But back to like that situation in 2018, I just had a feeling of like, oh, I'm still so far behind. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? Because I was 20 at that point in time, and 20 to 21, and like I started college at 21, while like most of my friends, they started at like 18, 19, which pretty much meant that like by the time I started college, a lot of people were right close to graduating. and I felt really, behind. And I mean, this is a sentiment that persisted, like every time I changed my major and I started doing something new. But it was kind of like where I was at the point in time, and I had this feeling of like, if I cannot get a hold of my head, I cannot figure this out, I'm gonna be stuck here forever. Like, why is it so hard? Why can I have control over my head? Because that's basically what was happening back then. Like, I was, like nothing was working properly. Definitely, like each milestone that I ended up coming across, like they helped, but they didn't solve the issue, basically. Like, and that was kind of like one of my frustration, right? One of the issues of contention that I had, because like I don't know, because I also felt at different points in time that I had tried everything, and it wasn't working. So I remember that in this moment it was kind of like a split feeling. So on one hand, I was feeling very sort of dejected, because like because I was there doing the thing I wanted. I was abroad to study, and now that was what I wanted, at least like on the short term. And yeah, my head hadn't really fixed itself, so that was like an issue. So I was feeling frustrated with like where I was at, and also confused, because everything was a mess. But at the same time, like, I was kind of happy, because I was like, I'm here, I'm living my life. I don't know what I'm doing, but that's the thing, I didn't know what I was doing, I didn't know what I was trying to get, and that was very, very much yeah, that was like an issue that I had. But and to be fair, like right now, like 8 years later, not 8 years, like we're 20, oh my god, it is almost 8 years later. Oh my god, like I'm doing much better, but I haven't really reached perfection. Once again, I don't really want perfection the way that I wanted it back then. For me, perfection is me being stable consistently, like being able to do the things that matter to me. So which is why like writing is such an important metric for me, because like when I'm writing, like it means that I'm good, like everything here is working the right way that it should. Everything is like going well with me in my life. And yeah, I think I'm gonna wrap this up right now, because I just saw that this video turned 1 hour long and I don't have that much storage left. So thanks for listening to me. Bye.